Puberty, or the Tunnel of Sexuality by Ralph Weber, Part 2. The Object Finding. The primacy of the genital zone is now established. So what is still missing is, psychoanalytically speaking, the object, for example, the person with whom the sexual act can be performed. Freud calls this process the so-called object finding. Even in the early oral phase, when the child was breastfed by the mother, an object of the infantile sex drive was present, namely the mother's breast. This object is lost in the further development of the child. The own body is found as an object of pleasure. The child acts autoerotically. In this respect, finding an object in puberty, for example, the successful search for a sexual partner, is a kind of rediscovery. Freud writes, "It is not without reason that the child sucking on the mother's breast has become a model for every love affair. Finding an object is actually a recovery. What was already there must be found again." We bow to Plato. However, it is not that after breastfeeding the child has lost his sexual object. Freud points out caregivers such as the wet nurse who absolutely love the child. For Freud, it's evident that these caregivers trigger sexual excitement in the child, which was initially linked to the ingestion of food. But there is also another factor, the mother's feelings towards the child, which originate from her sexual life, caresses, kisses, and cradles it, and clearly uses it as a substitute for a fully valid sexual object. The adult's attention to the child comes later taken up by the psychoanalyst Jean Laplanche and described as the so-called enigmatic messages of the adult that the child receives. In this sexually charged situation between mother and child, which usually takes place in the care of the child, it is now necessary for the child to learn to renounce being loved, which prepares him for adulthood. Excessive tenderness toward the child predisposes to neurotic illness in later days. Or to put it in another way, the pampering of the child disregards the dialectic of human existence, the oscillation of turning and turning away. According to Freud, the child's infantile fear is nothing but the child's fear of losing the sexual relationship, which is the nature of their attachment. Children are not afraid of the dark because they have heard scary stories, but because they do not see the loved one. According to Freud, only children with a large sex drive, or one that has become demanding through being pampered, tend to anxious. The concept of pampering or pampering was introduced into the psychoanalytic discourse by Alfred Adler in 1994, for example 1 year before the publication of the 3 essays on sexual theory, and describes the pampering or pampering upbringing as a variant of a neglectful upbringing. Adler pointed to their discouraging effect on the child, who thereby lost drive and motivation to strive to achieve their goals. The term was perverted by black pedagogy and later became the focus of the National Socialist educational guide, The German Mother and Her First Child, by the pediatrician Joanna Harrer, which was published in millions in Germans until 1987 as The Mother and Her First Child. However, the regulation of parental tenderness, which Freud intended, which prevents the premature outbreak of the sex drive, brings the child into a development during puberty in which it can be guided by sexual excitement in order to focus on an object, for example, a person to be loved such. Obviously, the child could choose people whom he knows in the family who are familiar. The postponement of sexual development during puberty enables the incest barrier to be set up. The child is now forbidden to love the familiar and must exclude them from the choice of objects. For Freud, this prohibition functions as an answer to a culture demand. He writes, "The observance of this barrier is above all a culture demand of society, which must defend itself against the consumption of interests by the family, which it needs for the creation of higher social units, and therefore works with all means to ensure that every individual to loosen the connection with his family, which is the only decisive factor in childhood." Freud described the genealogy of the trial taboo in his work Totem and Taboo, the summary of which can you find on this channel. These object choice, for example, the supposedly successful object finding of loving a person, initially takes place in the child's fantasies and is not yet prevented by the prohibition of incest. So the daughter loves her father and the son loves the mother. In the further course, these incessant fantasies are discarded, which is experienced as a painful detachment from the authority of the parents. This is necessary in order to repeatedly produce the contrast between the old and the new generation, which is important for cultural progress. If the detachment from the authority of the parents and the abandonment of love for them are not achieved, neurotic development and sexual problems can occur in adulthood. These persons remain infantile, fixated on their parents, and hide their sexual ambitions toward them with love and often charitable devotion. However, even after successful separation from the parents, these flow as blueprints into the choice of partner. As a partner, for example, the son looks for a caring woman according to the model Freud calls it the memory image of the mother, the daughter a strict man according to the memory image of the father. Freud's thoughts on this subject show a mildness in his thinking. It is perfectly okay to find parental parts in your partner that were unconsciously searched for. However, the relationship between the child's relationship with his or her parents and the repetition in the adult's partnership relationships also involves dangers. These can manifest themselves in considerable disturbances in the sexual life of adults. Thank you for listening.